If you still believe you need to feel motivated to have discipline, that belief might be exactly what's preventing you from changing your life. It sounds strange, right? Because you've been taught the opposite your entire life. That you need to really want it, feel inspired, be in the right mood. But the truth is, motivation is unstable, and relying on it is the fastest way to keep starting things and never finishing anything. Now think about this. How many times have you promised yourself you would change, start a routine, build habits, become more productive, and just a few days later, everything went back to normal? It's not a lack of ability. It's not laziness. And it's definitely not a lack of willpower. The problem lies in how you see discipline. And today, you'll understand why almost everything you've been taught about it is incomplete. Because discipline is not about being perfect. It's not about living trapped in rigid rules. And it's definitely not about suffering to get results. There is a much smarter way to build focus, daily consistency, and a success mindset. A way that works even on bad days, even when you don't feel like doing anything at all. And if you stay until the end, you'll realize that discipline is not something some people have and others don't. It's something that can be built, step by step, in a practical way. But before we continue, comment below, what is your biggest difficulty today in maintaining discipline? I want to understand exactly where you feel stuck. And of course, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to see could be the turning point you've been missing to finally move forward. Many people still believe that discipline means rigidity, as if it were living stuck in a military routine with no room for mistakes or flexibility. But in practice, those who truly develop discipline understand that it's not about perfection, but consistency. It's about showing up every day, even when the motivation isn't there. Interestingly, this more flexible view is what sustains true productivity and keeps habits alive over time. Think about someone who tries to change their life all at once. Waking up at 5 a.m., starting a diet, training hard, studying for hours, and within a few days, everything collapses. That happens because the person confused discipline with extreme intensity. Real self-discipline works more like a muscle. It grows with repetition, not excess. And here's an important point. Daily consistency always beats bursts of motivation. An experienced mentor would say that discipline is more like brushing your teeth than running a marathon. No one depends on motivation to brush their teeth. It has become an automatic habit. And that's exactly the game, turning important actions into natural patterns. Starting with something simple, like 5 minutes of total focus per day, may seem small, but that's what builds a solid success mindset. And of course, this requires a shift in perception. Instead of thinking, I need to do it perfectly, the person starts thinking, I need to do it again tomorrow. This adjustment changes everything, because it removes emotional pressure and strengthens daily discipline. In fact, many high performers today started exactly like this, doing little, but never failing in consistency. But there's one detail almost no one notices. Even understanding this, many people still feel stuck. Not because of a lack of information, but because of something deeper that is guiding their actions without them realizing it. And that's exactly where the next point comes in. There comes a moment when a person realizes an uncomfortable truth. Discipline has nothing to do with feeling motivated. In fact, the more someone depends on motivation, the more inconsistent they become. Self-discipline begins exactly when mood stops being a deciding factor. It's doing what needs to be done even when you feel lazy, even when the day is bad, even when no one is watching. It's like a silent agreement with yourself. Imagine someone who decides to train every day at 7 a.m. Some days they wake up excited. Other days, tired and unmotivated. The difference is not in the feeling, but in the action. Those who develop daily discipline don't constantly negotiate with their own minds. They just go. And over time, this strengthens not only habits, but identity itself. A common mistake is waiting for the right moment to act. That day when everything will be aligned, energy high, full focus. But that day rarely comes. Productive people understand that action comes before motivation, not the other way around. In fact, many times, simply starting is what creates focus and activates productivity. Once you start, that's it, your brain locks in. A practical example. Someone who wants to study can set a simple rule. Study at least 10 minutes a day, no matter what. It sounds small, but it eliminates excuses. And interestingly, most days those 10 minutes turn into 30 or 40. Because the hardest part isn't continuing, it's starting. That's how consistency is built almost invisibly. But now a deeper question arises. Why do some people manage to maintain this pattern while others give up halfway? The answer is not in willpower. It's in something much more internal, something that defines behavior before action even happens. There is a deeper level of discipline that few people notice. People don't act according to what they want, they act according to who they believe they are. It may sound subtle, but it completely changes the game. When someone says, "I try to be disciplined," deep down, they still don't see themselves as a disciplined person. And that directly impacts their habits, consistency, and daily productivity. Now compare that with someone who has internalized, "I am disciplined." That person doesn't depend as much on motivation or willpower because their actions are aligned with their identity. It's like someone who sees themselves as healthy. They naturally make better choices, almost automatically. The success mindset begins exactly here, in how a person defines themselves internally, even before results appear. An experienced mentor often says that identity is built through evidence. In other words, it's not enough to repeat empty affirmations. You need to prove to yourself, through small actions, that this new version is real. For example, by following a simple routine every day, even if small, a person begins to strengthen the belief that they have self-discipline. And this accumulates, creating a positive cycle of daily consistency. Think of someone who decides to read every day, even if it's just 5 pages. It seems small, but after a few weeks, they are no longer someone who wants to read. They become someone who reads. This type of shift is powerful because it reduces mental effort. The person no longer needs to decide so much. They simply act according to who they already believe they are. But there's an interesting detail here. If identity is built through small evidence, then every broken promise also builds the opposite effect. And that's exactly where one of the most overlooked pillars of discipline comes in. Something simple, but extremely powerful. There is a silent principle that separates those who have discipline from those who are constantly starting over. The ability to keep small promises made to yourself. We're not talking about big goals or radical changes, but simple daily commitments. When someone says, "I'm going to do it," and actually follows through, they strengthen something invisible but powerful, self-respect. And without that, no discipline can be sustained for long. The problem is that many people only value big achievements and ignore small wins. But it's exactly in these small actions that self-discipline is built. For example, deciding to make your bed every day, study for 10 minutes, or avoid a specific distraction is already enough to start changing your mindset. It sounds basic, but it creates a consistent behavior pattern that reflects into other areas of life. Now observe the opposite. When a person makes a promise and doesn't keep it, even if it's something small, they send a negative signal to their own mind. It's like saying, "I can't trust myself." And this slowly erodes internal confidence, affecting productivity, habits, and even how they face bigger challenges. That's why many people know what to do, but can't maintain focus and consistency. A practical strategy is simple. Reduce the size of the promise until it becomes impossible to fail. Instead of saying, "I'll train for 1 hour a day," start with, "I'll do 5 minutes." Instead of, "I'll study for 2 hours," start with, "I'll open the material and review for 10 minutes." This removes resistance and creates a track record of wins. And over time, the person naturally starts increasing the level. But here's something interesting. Even with small and achievable promises, many people still fail. Not because of lack of ability, but because of a very common mistake that happens right at the beginning of the journey. A mistake that seems harmless, but completely breaks consistency. There's a pattern that repeats all the time. A person decides to change their life and, on that same day, wants to transform everything. They create a perfect routine, full of habits, rigid schedules, and ambitious goals. On paper, it looks amazing. But in practice, this almost always leads to frustration. Because starting too big doesn't strengthen discipline. It breaks consistency before it even has a chance to form. The problem is not lack of willpower, it's strategy. When someone tries to do too many things at once, the brain goes into resistance. Change requires mental energy, and the greater the load, the greater the exhaustion. That's why, within a few days, that perfect routine starts to fall apart. The person loses rhythm, motivation drops, and soon that classic thought appears, "This isn't for me." But that's not true. The method was wrong. A common example is someone who decides to start training, studying, waking up early, meditating, and organizing their entire life, all in the same week. It's like trying to run a marathon without ever having walked. Self-discipline doesn't work like that. It's built in layers. First, you stabilize one simple habit, then you add another. That's the path of daily consistency and real productivity. High-performance mentors often say, if it feels too easy, it's perfect. Because the goal in the beginning is not to evolve fast, it's to not stop. Starting small reduces friction, lowers the chance of failure, and allows the habit to become natural. And when that happens, growth stops being forced and becomes inevitable. But here comes an interesting shift. If starting too big gets in the way, then what is the smartest way to begin this process? There is a simple, almost underestimated approach that has the power to unlock discipline once and for all. It may seem too basic at first, but there is a strategy that supports almost all long-term discipline. Start small, almost ridiculously small. Because in the end, what builds results is not initial intensity, but daily consistency. And simple actions have a powerful advantage. They don't scare the mind, they don't create resistance, and they are easy to repeat. Imagine someone who wants to build the habit of studying. Instead of planning hours and hours, they decide to study for just 5 minutes a day. It seems small, almost insignificant, but that's the point. It's so easy that there is no excuse. And the most interesting part is that, most of the time, those 5 minutes turn into 15 or 20, because the hardest part was starting. This small action activates focus, increases productivity, and reinforces self-discipline without excessive effort. The same applies to any area. One short workout instead of a perfect workout, one page read instead of a full chapter, one completed task instead of a huge to-do list. These micro-habits create a powerful cumulative effect. Over time, what was small becomes part of the routine, and the person naturally begins to raise the level without pressure or frustration. An experienced mentor would say that discipline is not born from strength, but from intelligent repetition. When you reduce the size of the action, you drastically increase the chances of maintaining consistency. And consistency, in turn, builds confidence, identity, and real results. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. But there is an invisible obstacle that can still get in the way. Even with simple actions, many people get stuck at a specific moment, the moment they need to decide to act. And it's exactly there that one of the biggest discipline killers appears. There is a critical moment in the day that determines whether someone will act or not, and it happens seconds before the action. That's when the mind starts negotiating. I'll do it later, I'm not in the mood today, I'll start tomorrow. And without realizing it, the person enters a cycle of constant postponement. That's why those who develop self-discipline understand a simple rule. Important decisions cannot be made in the heat of the moment. The key is to decide before you feel. In other words, create clear rules when your mind is calm and rational. For example, I will train at 7 a.m. every day. I will study right after lunch. I won't use my phone before completing my first task. When these rules are already defined, there is no space for internal negotiation. Action stops being an emotional choice and becomes an automatic commitment. This drastically reduces mental fatigue. Because let's face it, making decisions all the time is exhausting. And the more decisions you need to make, the higher the chance you'll choose the easiest path, which almost always goes against your goals. High performers don't rely on willpower all the time. They create systems that eliminate the need to decide. A practical example: leaving your workout clothes ready the night before. It seems simple, but it removes a barrier. Or defining exactly when and where you'll study, instead of depending on whenever I feel like it. These small adjustments increase focus, improve productivity, and strengthen daily discipline without extra effort. But even with clear rules, there is still something that can complicate everything. Because the more options a person has, the greater the chance they'll lose their way. And that's where another decisive factor comes in. One that few people take seriously, but that can either simplify or completely destroy: consistency. There is a silent enemy of discipline that almost no one notices: too many choices. It may seem harmless, but the more decisions a person has to make throughout the day, the greater the mental fatigue. And when the mind is tired, it naturally looks for the easiest path, which almost always goes against the consistency, habits, and productivity they want to build. Think about how many small decisions you make daily. What to eat, when to start, where to begin, what to do first. All of this consumes energy. Now imagine someone who has already defined almost everything. A fixed training schedule, a structured routine, organized tasks. This person doesn't depend on motivation because they've eliminated friction. Fewer decisions, more execution. Simple as that. A classic example is highly productive people who wear almost the same type of clothes or follow a predictable routine. It's not a lack of creativity, it's strategy. They are preserving mental energy for what truly matters. And this applies to any area. Deciding in advance what you'll do the next day drastically reduces procrastination and increases focus. In practice, this can be applied simply. Create a basic routine, set fixed schedules, and plan tasks the day before. The less you need to think when it's time to act, the stronger your daily discipline becomes. Consistency stops being an effort and becomes a natural, almost automatic flow. But there is an even more powerful factor that influences all of this, something that is often around you all the time, shaping your decisions without you realizing it. And depending on how it's set up, it may be completely sabotaging your progress. There is a truth that can completely change how someone sees discipline. You don't depend only on your willpower, you depend on the environment you're in. It may sound exaggerated, but where you live, work, and spend most of your time directly influences your habits, your focus, and your productivity. In many cases, the problem isn't a lack of discipline, it's the wrong environment. Think about someone who wants to study but keeps their phone nearby, with notifications on, social media open, and countless distractions around. Now compare that to someone sitting in a clean, organized space, free from interruptions. The difference in concentration level is massive. In other words, it's not just about having more discipline, but about making the right behavior easier and the wrong one harder. A practical example. If you want to read more, leave a book visible and within reach. If you want to avoid distractions, remove apps from your phone's home screen. If you want to train, prepare everything in advance. These small environmental adjustments reduce the effort required to act. And the lower the effort, the higher the chances of maintaining daily consistency. High-performance mentors often say, the environment beats motivation. Because at the end of the day, you will always follow the path of least resistance. So if your environment favors bad habits, you'll repeat those patterns. But if it supports positive habits, discipline starts to happen almost effortlessly. But here's an important point. Even with a well-adjusted environment, many people still fail because they rely on something unstable, willpower. And that alone explains why so many people start motivated and quit halfway through. At some point, every disciplined person realizes something that completely changes the game. Willpower is unstable. Some days it's high, other days it simply disappears. And if someone depends on it to maintain habits, consistency becomes a matter of luck. That's why people with true self-discipline don't rely only on motivation. They build systems. A system is nothing more than a set of organized actions that function almost automatically. For example, having a fixed time to study every day, linking one task to another, like reading right after coffee, or using alarms and visual triggers. This reduces the need to think, eliminates indecision, and turns action into something predictable. And predictability creates consistency. Imagine someone who always trains at the same time, in the same place, following a defined routine. This person doesn't need to decide whether to train, they simply follow the system. It's like autopilot. And this is powerful because it saves mental energy and maintains productivity even on difficult days. It's the kind of strategy that sustains long-term results. In practice, building systems can be simple. Set fixed schedules, use short task lists, establish triggers like after X, I do Y. Small adjustments that, combined, create a solid structure. And when structure exists, discipline stops being constant effort and becomes a natural consequence. But even with well-defined systems, there is something inevitable that happens to everyone, something that, depending on how you react, can strengthen your discipline even more or completely destroy your consistency. There is a truth that many people don't like to accept, but that completely changes how they deal with discipline. you will fail. No matter how focused, organized, or motivated you are, at some point, you'll break your routine, procrastinate, or fail to follow through. And that doesn't mean you lack self-discipline. It means you're human. The problem is not the failure itself, but how a person interprets that moment. Many people see a mistake as proof of incapability. I knew I couldn't do it. This isn't for me. But people with a success mindset see it differently. They understand that discipline is not about never falling. It's about getting back on track quickly without turning a slip into a pattern. Think about someone building the habit of training and, for some reason, misses a day. An average person might use that as an excuse to quit completely. A disciplined person simply resumes the next day without drama or excessive guilt. This ability to continue, even after failure, is what keeps daily consistency alive in the long run. An experienced mentor often says, "Never miss twice." In other words, you failed today? Fine. But tomorrow, you're back. This simple rule prevents small mistakes from growing into a cycle of procrastination. And by applying it, a person protects their habits, productivity, and progress. But there is a dangerous detail in this process, because often, it's not the mistake that destroys discipline. It's the thought that comes right after it. A silent, almost automatic thought that can sabotage everything without you even noticing. There is a very common mental trap that destroys more discipline than any lack of motivation. The classic, "I already messed up, so whatever." It's that moment when a person breaks their routine, fails a habit, and instead of getting back on track, decides to give up entirely. A small mistake turns into a pattern, and without realizing it, they completely break the consistency they were building. This happens because the mind seeks coherence. When someone fails, a feeling of frustration appears, and to justify that failure, the person continues failing. It's almost like saying, "Since it wasn't perfect, it's no longer worth it." But this logic is extremely dangerous because it turns an isolated slip into days, weeks, or even months of procrastination. Now, someone with self-discipline sees it completely differently. They understand that one mistake is just an outlier, not the beginning of a downfall. For example, ate something off your diet? Fine. Next meal you're back on track. Missed a study session? No problem. Resume the next day. This mindset protects habits and keeps productivity intact, even in the face of failure. A practical and powerful strategy. Treat each decision as independent. It doesn't matter what happened before. What you do now is what counts. This breaks the negative cycle and reinforces daily consistency. In the end, discipline is not about never failing, but about never letting failure define your behavior. And when a person truly understands this, everything starts to make sense. Because they realize that discipline is not something complicated or distant. It's a set of simple decisions, repeated the right way. And maybe now is the time to connect all of this from the beginning, in a way that completely changes how you see your own life. Now tell me honestly, how many times have you started something and stopped halfway, thinking the problem was you? After all this, it becomes clear that discipline is not about talent or motivation. It's about strategy, identity, and small actions repeated consistently. The real question is not, can I do it? But rather, are you willing to do the simple things every single day? Because in the end, it's not the big effort that changes your life. It's the small decisions you make when no one is watching. It's that moment when you choose to act even without feeling like it. It's when you decide to keep going, even after failing. And that's exactly where true self-discipline is built, quietly, but powerfully. Now stop and think. What is the first small action you can start today? Not tomorrow, not next week, today. It could be 5 minutes of focus, a simple task, a different decision. What matters is not the size, it's consistency. Because that's what builds habits, strengthens your mindset, and puts you on the path to real change. And I want to hear from you. What habit are you going to start building from now on? Comment below. It increases your commitment and might even inspire others who are on the same journey as you. If this content made sense to you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because from now on, you won't just consume content, you'll start transforming yourself.